Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be considering how you might modulate or change key to an extreme key. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, lots of people find that they can write music quite happily, but they get stuck in the same key. And then they find it a little bit difficult to know how to change key, to get to a different key, to create some variety in the music. And conventionally, most of the ways we do that are by using something called a pivot chord. So if you're in C major and you want to modulate to a nearby key like G major, C major's got no sharps, no flats. G major's just got one sharp, so it's a neighbouring key, only one key away on the circle of fifths. Then all you've got to do is to say, let's find a chord that's in C major and in G major, and we'll use one of those chords. And then we can smoothly transition from C major to G major. So basically, everything to the left of your chosen pivot chord is in the original key C major. You use the pivot chord that's common to both keys, and then everything to the right of that pivot chord is in the new key G major. It's a relatively easy way to modulate. Okay, now what happens if you want to do something that's more extreme? In other words, you want to modulate to a key that's nowhere near the key you're at the moment. And what we're going to do in this video is look at a pretty extreme example, because we're going to find out how in 4 bars or 4 measures we can modulate from C major to F sharp major. Well, F sharp major is a tritone away from C major. What do I mean by tritone? Literally 3 tones or 3 whole steps. So C, upper tone to D, upper tone to E, upper tone to F sharp. So I've got 3 tones there, so we call it a tritone. So I'm in C major and I'm going to modulate to the key that's a tritone above it. Now that is F sharp major. Why is that an extreme modulation? C major's got no sharps at all. F sharp major has got 6 sharps. So you won't find a pivot chord. There's no chord in C major that also appears in F sharp major. So if you want to go down the conventional pivot chord route, you'd be thinking, my goodness, I'm starting with a key that's got no sharps. I want to get to a key that's got 6 sharps, so I'll have to go through a load of other keys on the way. So you might think, well, I'll start in C major, use a pivot chord that takes me to G major, so I've now got 1 sharp. Oh, I could now use a pivot chord that takes me to D major that's got 2 sharps, and then I'll use another one that takes me to A major with 3 sharps. Then I'll use another one that takes me to E major with 4 sharps. Then I'll use another one that takes me to B major with 5 sharps, and then I'll use another one that takes me to F sharp major with 6 sharps, by which time, next Christmas has come and gone. So what happens if you want to effect an extreme modulation from C major to F sharp major quickly? Okay, have a listen to this. I've written here a little 4-bar piece that does exactly that, and then we'll have a look at how it's been achieved. So we're starting in C major and we're going to end in F sharp major. Even just hearing C major followed by F sharp major, they're poles apart, aren't they? Have a listen to this. Now, we've done that modulation from C major to F sharp major. We've gone from no sharps to 6 sharps in the space of those 4 bars or 4 measures. And the modulation has actually happened very quickly, basically across 2 chords. Does it sound like a total jar? Maybe it sounds like a little bit of a shock, not quite what you're expecting, but actually not as radical as you might think. So we need to think slightly outside the box in order to make this happen. And by the way, I'm not claiming that this is the only way to make this happen, but it's quite an effective way to make it happen. Let's have a look at what's actually happening in this piece of music. So everything to this point is quite happily in C major. Everything here is very happily in F sharp major. So really, this is the critical chord that you might have guessed because you've seen what I've written in red alongside these notes. I'm going to explain that in a moment. But let's just have a quick look at how we're starting in C major. Because before you can modulate, you need to do enough to establish the original key. And then after you've modulated, you need to do enough to establish the new key. That's the challenge of doing this in just 4 bars or 4 measures. It's a fairly crazy idea. But if we look at the first bar, the first measure, all of this is chord 1 in C major. So C, E, G, that's chord 1 in C major. And all these notes belong to the chord. These notes are passing notes. And then I'm back to chord 1 again. So that's helping me to establish C major as our home key. In the second bar, or the second measure, I go on to this chord. Well, in C major, this is a chord 4. It's in first inversion. And as yet, there's nothing to say that anything strange is going to happen. Aha! Enter shock chord. Let's have a look at this chord. Now, when you first look at that chord, you might think, what on earth has that got to do with C major? You might even think, what on earth has it got to do with F sharp major? If we're going to a key with all these sharps, and then you've given us a chord that's got 2 flats in it. What on earth is going on? Well, what I'm doing here is I'm using one of the augmented 6th chords. So in C major, if you're not sure about augmented 6th chords, by the way, we've got a video that explains all that elsewhere. But the augmented 6th chord is based on, when you're in a major key, it's based on the 6th degree of the scale that's lowered by a semitone or a half step. If you're in a minor key, it's just the 6th degree. So I'm in C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th note is A. Let's lower that to A flat. And that explains why I've got A flat in the bass, which by the way flows on quite nicely from this A natural, just going by step to A flat. Okay, now to make this augmented 6th chord, I base it on that A flat, that 6th degree of a minor scale, or the lowered 6th of a major scale. I put an augmented 6th above it, so that's F sharp. I then put the tonic in the middle of the chord somewhere. Well, there's the tonic. And then we've got the Italian, French and German 6th. Well, you might think, does it matter which one I use? What we've basically got at this point with A flat at the bottom, F sharp and then a C is an Italian 6th. If I add a D into the middle of it, an augmented 4th above the bottom A flat, we call it a French 6th. If I put an E flat in it, a perfect 5th above the bottom note, we call it a German 6th. So I'm using a German 6th. Could I have used an Italian 6th or a French 6th? Possibly. The German 6th in this case is more useful to us, and we'll find out why in just a moment. Now, what I'm actually doing is using this German 6th chord as a pivot chord to take us to F sharp major, but we're doing this by a slightly circuitous route. Now, how on earth does that help us, as I say, when you've got 2 flats? We can think this chord as a German 6th in C major, hopefully that makes sense, but we can also think the chord enharmonically. Okay, let's be sure about our terms. When we use this word enharmonic, what we mean is that a note sounds the same as another note, but it looks different. So can you see this B sharp is an enharmonic equivalent of this C. So in other words, if I play C, there's C. If I play B sharp, it's the same note. So it sounds exactly the same, but it looks different. So it's an enharmonic equivalent. By the same token, this D sharp is an enharmonic equivalent of this E flat. So I've got E flat down here, but that note is also D sharp, because every note has got more than one name. And in the bass, I've got an A flat here, but an enharmonic equivalent of A flat is G sharp. So in other words, I can call this chord A flat, E flat, C, F sharp, and it's functioning as a German 6th in the key of C. But if I call it the same chord, but enharmonically, I spell it differently, G sharp, D sharp, B sharp, F sharp. What I've now got is a dominant seventh in the key of C sharp. Now it could be C sharp minor or it could be C sharp major, because the dominant seventh will be the same for both of those keys. Okay, so I hope this is all making sense. As an A flat, E flat, C, F sharp chord, it's a German 6 in the key of C. Same chord spelt differently, G sharp, D sharp, B sharp, F sharp. We're now looking at a dominant seventh in the key of C sharp major. Now, why would I want to use a dominant seventh in the key of C sharp major when I'm trying to get to F sharp major? Well, the next chord here is a chord of C sharp major. Aha, so when we have a dominant seventh, which is what we've got in this enharmonic version of this chord, dominant seventh, it kind of wants to resolve to this. Okay, so quite often you have a 5/7, a dominant seventh, and it's going to resolve to the tonic chord. There are other possibilities, but that's the most common. The dominant seventh goes to the tonic chord. You can kind of hear that that's kind of where it wants to go. You hear that F sharp pulling us down to E sharp. So that's what's happening there. Now, by going to a chord of C sharp major at this point, it feels as if we've kind of modulated to C sharp major. But what we're actually doing is saying this chord of C sharp major, which basically fills up the rest of the bar, is also the dominant chord in F sharp major. It's called 5 in F sharp major. So I can go 5/7 to 1 in C sharp major, but I then say, even though this is 1 in C sharp major, it's also called 5 in F sharp major. So I spend the whole of this bar using chord 5 in F sharp major, but just to really sharpen up the fact that it's 5 in F sharp major and not 1 in C sharp major, I've just reinforced it by adding this B, because that really makes sure that this 5 becomes a 5/7, a dominant seventh in F sharp major. Therefore, that then resolves to the tonic chord of F sharp major. So we use the first few chords to establish the key of C major. We then use this as a pivot chord, but we do it by using the German 6 in this case, one of the chromatic chords. We rename it, respell the chord, so it becomes a dominant seventh in C sharp major. We then go to C sharp major here, but we then make sure that we're experiencing this C sharp major chord as a chord 5 in F sharp major, particularly by reinforcing that seventh to make it a 5/7. And then we have a tonic chord of F sharp major. So we've established the original key, we end up with a cadence in the new key. So there's no doubt that we're finishing in F sharp major. And this is the clever stuff in the middle that enables us to use a chromatic chord as a pivot chord, and then to respell it as a chord that takes us to the new key. So have a listen at the musical impact of that, having explained it. Now, it doesn't matter which musical style you want to work in. You could do that as a kind of hymn tune style like it is at the moment. You could do it as a piece of heavy rock, do whatever you want. But all I'm showing you is a technique, a means of getting from one key to one of the keys that is at furthest away from where you've started. Obviously, it doesn't have to be C major to F sharp major. It can be any tritone relationship you want to go. But by using that German 6 and respelling it as the seventh chord of the dominant seventh chord of the dominant chord of the new key, and then using that to establish a cadence in the new key, you can actually do what may seem impossible in the space of 4 bars. So how about that? So enjoy playing around with that and seeing what other possibilities you can come up with for modulation to extreme keys. Well, if you found that helpful, enjoyed the video, do go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk, where you can find lots more to help you in terms of courses and tuition, and an opportunity to join our very exciting Maestros group, which you can also join by clicking below this video. So see what's there for you.